Soviet infantry advanced through the burning streets of Berlin. It was the morning of May 2, 1945. The bunkers stood empty. Red Army soldiers stepped over debris, checking off the names of the Third Reich leadership. Hitler was dead. Heinrich Müller was captured. Hermann Goering had surrendered. Every top official faced a prison cell or a morgue, except one. The state generated millions of death certificates. Bureaucrats logged every casualty across Europe. Yet the man who managed this paper empire vanished without a single official record. Heinrich Müller, the head of the Gestapo, erased his own existence. Decades would pass, but no stone would ever mark his grave. The last verified record of his life dates to April 29, 1945. The man who vanished without a trace in the spring of 1945 did not begin his career as a blind fanatic. He started as a 22-year-old combat veteran trying to survive a ruined economy. In a quiet Bavarian state police precinct, Heinrich Müller read through a stack of daily field summaries. The heavy clatter of his typewriter echoed across the room as he transcribed observations onto fresh paper. He neatly punched holes in the finished document and secured it inside a thick cardboard folder. The dossier he compiled documented the movements of local political agitators, including a speaker named Adolf Hitler. Born in Munich on April 28, 1900, he had served as a decorated reconnaissance pilot during the First World War. His background was rooted in strict Catholic traditions and a foundational respect for state authority. That conventional police background stood in sharp contrast to his eventual role as the chief architect of political terror. But in the early 1920s, the economic fabric of Germany was unraveling. The Treaty of Versailles demanded 132 billion gold marks in reparations. The 1923 hyperinflation crisis wiped out the life savings of millions. By November, a single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. While violent street battles broke out between communist factions and nationalist groups, a government paycheck remained the only anchor of stability. Müller joined the provincial police forces not out of ideological devotion, but to secure an income in a collapsing society. He tracked the National Socialist Party simply because the existing Weimar laws defined them as a threat to public order. His internal reports were precise, thorough, and devoid of personal political sentiment. He viewed himself purely as a technocrat managing the flow of official paperwork. When the national political winds eventually shifted, he calmly prepared to offer his filing skills to a new employer. Those precise administrative skills perfectly matched the new security apparatus. The National Socialists seized power in 1933. A secret state police force terrified an entire continent. Yet its headquarters chronically suffered from a severe shortage of actual field personnel. The Gestapo never built a large army of professional undercover spies. They shifted the logistical burden of daily surveillance directly onto the citizens. The daily work revolved around endless incoming paper. A regular postman delivered a handwritten letter from an ordinary civilian. A desk clerk received the sealed envelope. He stamped a blue registration number on the top right corner. The sorted document moved straight to an interrogator's wooden tray. Stacks of these paper denunciation letters piled high. They covered heavy wooden desks across every regional office from Berlin to Munich. 32,000 official Gestapo agents controlled a population of 80 million people. This demographic ratio required highly specific bureaucratic management. Heinrich Müller became the operational chief of the Gestapo by 1939. He was never a passionate ideological fanatic. He was a master administrator. His only focus was processing large volumes of human data. Heinrich Himmler explicitly called him the best policeman in Germany. Müller understood a fundamental truth. True political terror relied on convincing the public that hidden eyes watched them everywhere. This induced paranoia multiplied the reach of a small administrative staff. Citizens actively betrayed their next-door neighbors over minor property disputes. Factory workers eliminated workplace rivals through anonymous handwritten tips. Spouses handed over spouses to settle private domestic quarrels. By 1944, the Gestapo maintained regional headquarters in major occupied cities like Vienna and Prague. The central office in Berlin occupied a large complex on Prinz Albrechtstrasse. Yet the core enforcement mechanism remained exactly the same. The civilian population policed itself. Constant fear mixed with personal greed. The agency rewarded those individuals who submitted their reports first. 80% of all political arrests began with a voluntary tip from an ordinary citizen. The voluntary tips only built the foundation. Soon, the paperwork escalated into the logistics of extermination and the total control of the elite. Over 7,000 officers, priests, and aristocrats went to prison in a few weeks. Brown cardboard folders piled up on the desks at Prinz Albrechtstrasse 8. Inside were the names of the old nobility. After the bomb detonated at the Wolf's Lair in July 1944, the Valkyrie plot collapsed. Müller took charge of the investigation. He needed networks, not just perpetrators. Interrogation summaries yielded new names. Clerks typed up the lists. Black ink stamps pounded onto fresh arrest warrants before couriers dispatched the paper stacks across the Reich. The scale required strict logistics. Every confession generated 10 new suspects. Every suspect required a new index card. The physical storage of these files consumed entire rooms. The state police broke the opposition with typewriters, not guns. Müller applied this clerical method to mass murder. He directly organized the deportation of hundreds of thousands of Jewish people to the camps in the East. Train schedules aligned with quota sheets. But the chief focused equally on his own colleagues. He gathered dossiers on political figures. He infiltrated the communist underground and planted informants inside conservative circles. He collected data without ideological passion. He simply hoarded secrets. His filing cabinets held the real power. As the war ended, this archive transformed from a police tool into personal capital. He held files capable of destroying post-war reputations. The state police chief maintained active connections with foreign intelligence networks and possessed compromising material on international diplomats. He took those dangerous archives and lists of foreign agents underground when Soviet artillery began leveling Berlin in April 1945. The police chief walked down the gray concrete corridors of the Reich Chancellery bunker with files in his hands, maintaining a steady pace while other officials prepared for suicide. The shelter sat 15 meters below the garden. It was protected by 3 meters of solid, reinforced concrete. The Red Army ringed the capital with heavy armor and thousands of field guns. Up above, entire city blocks crumbled into rubble, and the thick concrete walls of the complex vibrated continuously from the heavy impact of Soviet howitzers. Yet eyewitnesses observed no panic in his behavior. Müller attended staff briefings, received instructions, and processed daily paperwork as if the front line remained far away. He stayed inside the bunker performing his regular duties until at least the 29th of April. His calm demeanor suggested the cold calculation of a man designing his own escape with the exact methodical precision he once applied to drafting arrest warrants. He arranged his final affairs just 1 day before the collapse of the command structure. After that date, no witnesses remained. From the ruins of 1945 Berlin, the police chief stepped into complete obscurity, triggering 70 years of empty debates inside CIA offices. The post-war manhunt required paperwork. Interpol typed out a fresh index card bearing his name. The file went out globally. The Nuremberg trials began in November 1945. Prosecutors documented the guilt of 24 major regime leaders, but the folder belonging to the Gestapo chief remained an empty cover. 3 theories emerged. Perhaps he died under the rubble as an unidentified corpse. Maybe he escaped to South America. Or he surrendered to Soviet forces, trading his expertise for survival. The bureaucrat defeated the bureaucracy. In response, Western intelligence agencies launched a massive analytical operation to trace his trail. The massive analytical operation started in the physical ruins of the capital. Allied intelligence officers sifted through shattered masonry and scattered documents, hunting the vanished elite. The Chancellery Garden smelled heavily of burning fuel and pulverized brick. There, soldiers cataloged Hitler's charred remains. Days later, investigators formally identified Himmler's body following his cyanide suicide in British custody. The highest echelon was quickly accounted for. Then, search teams reached Müller's address. The apartment stood entirely empty. Every personal item was gone. His final known offices held nothing but cleared desks and stripped filing cabinets. By May 1945, Berlin's population had collapsed from 4.3 million to just 2.8 million residents. This sharp demographic vacuum created the perfect cover for a fugitive. A high-ranking official could easily vanish among the displaced masses. Unverified sightings surfaced almost immediately. Some informants claimed he crossed into Soviet-held territory. Other reports placed him traveling south toward the mountains of Bavaria with forged identity papers. In late 1945, recovery crews reportedly dug up a body near the Reich Chancellery. Early statements identified the corpse as Müller, but forensic analysis failed to provide a definitive match. The physical evidence remained weak. The supporting documentation proved incomplete. Western intelligence services rejected the convenient conclusion outright. The complete lack of a confirmed corpse forced their hand. British and American agencies kept the Gestapo chief's dossiers officially open well into the 1970s. Those open intelligence dossiers forced Western investigators to trace the established evacuation corridors leading out of Europe. Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal spent years collecting sworn testimonies across multiple continents without ever securing a single piece of verified documentation. His initial pursuit focused on the confirmed transatlantic trajectories of men like Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele. Both fugitives survived the collapse. Their respective journeys relied on the so-called rat lines, a quiet logistical network orchestrated by sympathetic Vatican intermediaries and former military organizations. These informal transit channels smoothly moved highly sought-after individuals away from the immediate jurisdiction of Allied military tribunals. The primary destination for the vast majority of these established routes was the permissive political environment of South America. Argentina, governed by Juan Perón during this critical period, maintained an open immigration policy regarding former German administrative officials. Between 1945 and 1955, the host country accepted over 100,000 German and Austrian immigrants. This sudden demographic influx into a nation of roughly 16 million people created a perfect layer of social cover. A careful functionary with substantial financial resources could easily blend into the thriving expatriate communities developing within Buenos Aires or Bariloche. The surrounding Argentine society absorbed these new arrivals smoothly, deliberately asking very few questions about their specific wartime activities. Over the ensuing decades, international intelligence agencies received dozens of reported sightings, spanning a massive geographic area from Chile to Brazil. Many respected journalists and former military officers provided detailed accounts claiming to have spotted the missing Gestapo chief. The reports kept arriving, yet this growing mountain of anecdotal evidence clashed sharply against the reality of an empty physical record. Investigators possessed countless verbal accounts, but they lacked a single confirming photograph. Ultimately, Simon Wiesenthal abandoned his active search, formally admitting his inability to ever close the case. The absence of Argentine documents forced the CIA to seek buyers of police experience closer to home. How was the domestic surveillance network in Eastern Europe actually created? Through the direct integration of former enemy expertise. In May 1945, Heinrich Müller possessed a rare commodity. He commanded 12 years of applied political repression. He understood the logistics of interrogation and the breaking of organized resistance. The Soviet Union required exactly these specific skills. The Ministry of State Security formed in 1946. Later known as the KGB, the agency needed experienced men to control newly occupied territories. Joseph Stalin demanded total compliance. The Soviet commanders needed a working model for civilian monitoring across the Eastern Bloc. Müller knew exactly how to build it. Years later, senior CIA officer James Critchfield hunted for this specific connection. He investigated missing Nazi war criminals for American intelligence. Critchfield opened captured Soviet intelligence folders from the early Cold War era. He studied the translated field reports. He tracked the documented movements of a highly placed German asset working directly for Moscow. The operational knowledge matched the Gestapo chief exactly. The reports detailed specific interrogation tactics and informer recruitment strategies. But crucial paragraphs vanished. Heavy layers of solid black ink covered the pages. The thick redactions obscured dates, specific locations, and proper names. The Soviet censors erased the source's true identity from the paper record. The transferred methodology proved effective. Following the organizational template of the Gestapo, East Germany officially established the Stasi in February 1950. The new security agency perfected the inherited techniques. They mapped entire city blocks using the old German models. They turned neighbors against each other. They achieved the highest density of domestic monitoring in Europe. The Stasi maintained one active informant for every 66 citizens across the country. The foundational knowledge for this network came directly from the post-war transition. Decades later, specific pages concerning this unnamed German asset in Moscow archives remain permanently classified. While veteran officers analyzed MGB archives, historians returned to the physical reality of Berlin in May 1945. Tens of thousands of unidentifiable corpses covered the streets. Workers cleared rubble by hand. They dumped bodies into hastily dug trenches without any paperwork. Work crews burned corpses outdoors. The crash of collapsing brickwork buried hundreds deep beneath the ruined buildings. In just a few weeks of combat, more than 50,000 Berlin civilians died. The sheer volume of casualties made individual identification physically impossible. Soviet burial squads processed bodies in bulk. Enormous craters left by aerial bombs became mass pits. Nobody recorded names. This landscape of undocumented death provided ideal physical cover. If a stray shell hit Müller during the street fighting, his remains would blend into the anonymous mass. Many officials took their own lives during those final days. The chaos of a fallen capital meant a high-ranking officer could vanish simply by removing his uniform. A dead man in civilian clothes was just another casualty. Historians consider this the most probable outcome, yet this hypothesis met strong resistance. The theory assumes that a man who spent decades orchestrating the disappearances of others died randomly without an escape plan. Allied investigators reviewed the casualty reports. They weighed the mass graves against the profile of the Gestapo chief. The missing man understood contingency planning better than anyone. Consequently, Western intelligence agencies formally refused to close the case. The intelligence agency's refusal to accept a random casualty found physical proof wrapped in a grim paradox. The tombstone of the Gestapo chief stood inside a Berlin Jewish cemetery. In September 1963, authorities finally excavated this specific location. Dark earth crumbled from 3 sets of unidentified bones during the exhumation. One wooden marker carrying the terror director's name sat above the remains of 3 unknown men. Forensic analysis immediately exposed the truth. None of these excavated skeletons matched his known physical profile. Investigators realized they were dealing with a deliberate forgery. They were no longer fighting lost municipal records. This was an active campaign of physical deception. The scattered remains were just props planted in the dirt. Someone intentionally faked the grave. The faked grave proved the deception was intentional. The CIA compiled a detailed report on the Gestapo chief's possible location in 1967. Reports kept coming. In the early 1970s, American intelligence agents tracked his name through Eastern European spy networks. These were not old historical summaries. These were active field assessments produced decades after a man supposedly died in a bombed-out capital. The United States Congress passed the Freedom of Information Act in 1966 to guarantee government transparency. But the Heinrich Müller dossiers bypassed this rule. They stayed locked. They remained in the secure archives for 40 more years. When the government finally declassified portions of the files in the early 2000s, censors had already altered the pages. Thick black censor bands covered names, dates, and locations. The paper revealed a deliberate intelligence hunt. Meanwhile, the West German government ran a parallel track. During the 1960s, federal prosecutors opened a broad investigation. They wanted to find and try surviving Nazi war criminals. The authorities eventually closed the Müller case. They declared he most likely died in the ruins of Berlin. But they admitted they lacked the physical evidence to make a legal declaration. The witness testimonies exposed a different reality. Former SS officers and Gestapo staff gave conflicting statements. Some swore he died underground. Others claimed he escaped the continent. When pressed by authorities, witnesses quickly changed their stories. The truth surfaced during a formal deposition in the 1960s. A West German investigator sat across from a former Gestapo associate. The investigator asked a direct question about Müller's post-war movements. The former officer stopped talking. He cited a direct threat to his personal safety and refused to continue the interrogation. That sudden silence in the 1960s interrogation room matched the new Cold War reality. Former SS officers now wore different uniforms. They operated as high-ranking intelligence assets on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Blackmail required hard leverage. The Gestapo had plenty. They spent 12 years stockpiling it inside their Berlin headquarters. The mechanics of this power relied on meticulous surveillance. Clerks compiled thick cardboard folders day after day. Inside lay the private sins of foreign citizens, visiting diplomats, and local community leaders. Thousands of physical paper index cards carried the exact names of German politicians. The typed lines detailed hidden transgressions and financial debts. Whoever controlled these archives controlled post-war Europe. Heinrich Müller possessed unlimited access to the vaults beneath Prinz Albrechtstrasse. He could easily extract the most damaging files before Soviet tanks breached the city limits. By the early 1950s, the intelligence landscape had shifted. The West German BND evolved from an earlier espionage network. Former Wehrmacht General Reinhard Gehlen established it. He relied on direct American military funding. In East Germany, the Stasi formed in 1950. They quietly absorbed experienced Gestapo investigators to build a ready-made surveillance network. Officially, international tribunals hunted down war criminals across the globe. Secretly, Western intelligence and Soviet intelligence actively recruited those same men. The emerging global conflict demanded their expertise. 80 years later, the archival black holes surrounding Müller make perfect strategic sense. Moscow would never admit to utilizing the former Gestapo chief. Washington would hide his extraction to avoid massive domestic scandals. Müller did not just memorize street informants, he held complete Gestapo dossiers on key Allied operatives and prominent German political figures. His memory was a loaded weapon. Many individuals featured in those classified police files had successfully transitioned into the democratic era. They secured influential positions as international diplomats, regional mayors, and federal lawmakers. Surviving administrative records confirmed the presence of highly compromising documents on people who remained firmly in power. Resistance fighters hunched over paper, documenting everything they remembered. While intelligence agencies locked their official archives tight to protect compromised politicians, fragmented data surfaced far away from government vaults. Holocaust-era testimony broke the silence. Roughly 3 million Jews survived across Europe, and many delivered their very first statements inside crowded displaced persons camps. These concentration camp survivors spoke of a senior Gestapo official. The man remained active long after the fall of Berlin. Coded names appeared directly on the margins of post-war testimonies. The descriptions remained vague. The exact locations varied, but the presence lingered clearly between the lines of handwritten diaries. Victims tracked his movements. A high-ranking officer operated beyond the German capitulation. The puzzle pieces converged. Someone was still giving orders. Yet those post-war survivor testimonies never echoed inside a judicial courtroom. In 1961, Adolf Eichmann stood inside a glass booth in Jerusalem, while the dossier of his immediate superior remained entirely empty. The deportation coordinator listened to the charges through heavy headphones. Israeli operatives had extracted him from Argentina the previous year. The legal mechanism required a physical presence, forcing the officer to confront the evidence. The military tribunals established a procedural mechanism for handling captured leadership. A heavy wooden gavel struck the sounding block at Nuremberg, ending the proceedings against Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the highest surviving SS leader. The International Court authorized his execution in 1946, dismantling the command echelon. Former Auschwitz commandant Rudolf Haas faced a similar legal accounting before his execution in Poland. Heinrich Müller was Kaltenbrunner's direct subordinate, holding authority over the secret state police. The global pursuit operation processed camp administrators and regional commanders over 2 decades. Prosecutors compiled exhaustive documentation, linking operational orders to specific administrative desks as each trial reconstructed another fragment of the Gestapo hierarchy. The Gestapo chief simply vanished. He bypassed the courts. The record stayed blank. Hundreds of thousands of victims remained without a judicial verdict. Without a tribunal, the Gestapo chief shifted from an indicted war criminal to an unsolved historical problem. April 29, 1945. On this exact date, witnesses saw the commander for the last time. The 20th century usually caught its worst perpetrators. The Nuremberg trials prosecuted 24 principal defendants. International military tribunals demanded strict accountability. The greatest criminals faced judges, heard their verdicts, and met the executioner. The absence of this specific man defied that established pattern. He bypassed the legal framework. The investigation halted. Silence served the intelligence agencies of the victorious nations. Washington and Moscow prioritized classified data over public trials. The new powers maintained the secrecy. The mystery survived not through a lack of evidence, but through deliberate institutional protection from the very governments that won the war. Certain truths held more value hidden than exposed. The world moved forward, leaving the missing policeman behind. Concrete ceilings, 8.5 meters underground, held tight against the Soviet artillery. Smoke and shattered bricks choked the air above the Führer bunker in Berlin. The last confirmed coordinate. The pursuit always circles back to that final April night. Decades later, the classified archive folders remain open. The designated grave stands empty, containing no body.